Good evening or morning or whatever time of the day it happens to be. Welcome one, welcome all to the Writer's Black podcast. I am your solo host this week, Greg Nikas, back for another week of escapades. Is that what we do on the show? We do escapades? Fear not, gentle listener. Mine is not the only voice you'll be hearing on this podcast episode. I'm not ranting to myself this week, luckily. Young adult horror author Ryan La Sala is joining us this week to talk all about his works, whether it's the in-depth mystery of the Honeys, the cerebral horror of Beholder, or the aquatic apocalyptic vibes of his latest work, Dead of Summer, available now, by the way, if you wanted to go out and pick it up and read it and then come back and listen to this podcast. I'm sure he wouldn't object, and I don't think I would either. If you're enjoying the Writer's Black podcast, please consider giving us a review over on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Leave the comments, let us know what we're doing right, let us know what we're doing wrong. We're still learning, getting our bearings, figuring it all out. You can also follow us over on social media at Writers Black Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you want to go above and beyond, go that extra mile, you can head over to patreon.com/writersblackpod. Subscribe there absolutely for free, and you can get episodes of the podcast one day early, as well as just a few bonus goodies. All right, that's enough housekeeping from me. Let's get into the episode with Ryan La Sala. Take us back a little bit, Ryan. We have little Ryan, right? Growing up in Connecticut, he's drawing, he's watching Sailor Moon, he's performing in theater. What drew that little kid to start writing?
Oh, first of all, performing is a really generous verb to use for whatever I was doing on stage, but they did allow me up there time and time again. This is not really a flattering answer, but it is the truth. The reason I started writing was spite, purely out of spite. I was being given books as a teenager that were really popular, like Twilight and The Hunger Games, Divergent. While I like a lot of these books now, at the time, I was sort of aghast because these were, prophesied as the very most imaginative books, right? YA is this beautiful place where you can kind of do anything, right? Like your imagination is the limit. And none of these people had imagined a single gay person into any of these books, which was bizarre to me because, I was gay from a very young age, and I
Mm.
always knew. And I always felt sort of a lack of queer people in the greater world, right? According to media, so I set out to start writing stories that I wanted to read with characters like me. And the more people told me that it just wasn't viable and that there was no market for this and no one would want to read this other than me, the more determined I became to keep going and to keep writing down, my ideas. And ironically, the story that I started in high school, sort of because of this, it became my debut novel.
Spite is a really great motivator, I've learned, just in my
Yeah.
my age, and that's, I think, a really great reason for the spite, if that makes any sense.
I think so. I think that, I call it spite, but I can kind of recognize that maybe I didn't have the most noble intentions back then, but
I think
that does kind of coincide with a sense of injustice,
mm.
and in a sense of a mistake being made at kind of a cosmic level that I sort of set out to write for selfish reasons. But, now I can sort of claim that all along I wanted to read about myself in literature, but I just wanted to entertain myself to begin with.
I think some of the best stories start like that. It's the tales we tell ourselves, even as little kids, that like develop into these like bigger things as we get older.
Totally, totally. And that's
Yeah.
why when I meet young writers, which I do very often because I talk in schools and stuff, I always tell them, I'm like, hey, like people are going to sort of diminish you because of your age, right? But like feel free to take yourself as seriously as you need to kind of get over that, ultimately the kind of the very embarrassing act of writing things down.
What are some other good pieces of advice you might give those kids when you're talking to them?
I tell them that, starting a story is oftentimes determined by finding kind of the right person to tell that story through. So many young writers decide to kind of start with the world. They want to do world building. They want to talk about dragons and magic and things like that. And then it comes to the actual story. And there's not much there because it's like written from the point of view of the worst possible person, like the most boring character, the paladin, right? The knight. And I'm like, I don't care about them. I want to hear from like the kitchen wench who has more magic than she knows what to do with, but she has no actual training. And as a result, she just has to make the same soup over and over for like the king's diabetic grandmother, right? Like, what's her story? Let's talk about her. So I always tell them, like, find the right character. I always tell them to look at the way power functions in the worlds that they're building, because that often can tell you who would be interesting to read about in terms of disruption. And sometimes people are not looking for a craft answer. That's the answer that I give you. And so I do have, broader advice. It's like chase your dreams and things like that too. But half the time when people ask me for advice, I turn it back around on them and I'm like, all right, well, what are you struggling with? Like, let's talk about what's going on, which I actually find many people are not ready to be reflected at. They would rather just kind of get these platitudes and nod than actually, confess that they've got a real problem going on.
So your first few pieces, they weren't like strictly horror content.
No.
Um, but you made the pivot when you were writing the Honeys. Was that shift to writing horror difficult for you? What was like the inspiration for it, and why did it stick?
I've always loved horror stories, like as like a consumer. It had never really occurred to me to write a horror until I thought of the idea for the Honeys. And the Honeys, like it kind of starts with a really classic premise of a kid, a gender fluid kid. That part's not the classic part, but a kid going to a summer camp to investigate something supernatural potentially occurring behind the veneer of this beautiful sort of Americana traditional place. That's kind of classic. And for anyone who's read it, it kind of goes completely off the rails from there in terms of what they discover and how they deal with it. But I just wanted to write a story that had a lot to do with other things like the themes of gender fluidity, the sort of the ritual nature of beehives and their behaviors. As you can imagine, a book about the honeys being about honeybees takes a lot of inspiration from like ecology and biology, which are a lot of the things that I, read about when I'm not writing. And it just kind of turned out way more horrific than I think I was ready for. But there was no choice in the matter. I wrote that book in a single month, and it kind of came out all at once during lockdown when everyone was sort of shut in their houses during the year 2020. And I think because I was just craving, after looking at the same four walls of my apartment in New York City, I wanted to write about the sort of feral, unhinged nature of the wilderness, right? And that's kind of the book that I got out of it.
The relationship between Mars and Caroline. So Mars is openly gender fluid. There's not like a specific label placed on Caroline, but she exhibits a lot of gender fluid kind of maybe qualities. Was
Mhm.
that maybe her exploring something of her own, or is it her just being a really good ally to Mars?
I think it's more so her being a good ally, but also the horror of that book is that Caroline, and this, if you get into the book 6 pages, you'll hit this point. So I'm not spoiling anything. This is literally the very first chapter, but Caroline dies right away. It's the sort of inciting incident of this book, and it's the thing that propels Mars to go to the camp that she was at when this incident occurred. And so but part of the horror of that is that we really don't get to hear from Caroline. We really don't get to know what her actual experience was because she's the victim of it. And a big part of Mars's story is, retaining the fact that they're gender fluid in a really binary summer camp that is ultimately gonna try to force them to pick a side, right? And Mars doesn't want to. And Mars is sort of enduring this discomfort in order to piece together clues about Caroline, but we don't really ever learn about Caroline's real identity or how she would talk about herself because that's kind of the trauma of an abrupt death.
You don't have to answer this one if you don't want to, but how did writing the Honeys help you kind of get through the loss of your own sibling? Because there might be
Yeah,
some parallels there that you kind of pulled from your own life.
absolutely. So what people sometimes don't know is that I had the idea for the honeys well before anyone in my life died. And then suddenly when my sister passed away very suddenly, and luckily nowhere near as horrific as like what's depicted in the book, but almost as suddenly, I was left with a similar moment to Mars of having sort of all of this grief and not really having any place to put it because everyone around me was in such shock. And the reason that I sort of eventually sat down to write the Honeys is because I wanted to take this idea that I had already had about, magic in the wilderness and honeybees and sort of use that vocabulary to talk to myself about what had happened and how I felt about it and what it was like. And so it was years later when I finally wrote it, but not years and years, like maybe like 2 or 3 years after that I finally sat down and wrote that book. And um, it was sort of the first time that I had kind of asked myself for the words to discuss this particular loss and the grief and the guilt around it. And it was really hard, but it was really worthwhile. And now I get a lot of messages from people. A lot of grief counselors actually have like used the book as like recommendations to their clients, or teens that have gone through a loss. And that to me is like a really kind of tender honor that I wasn't counting on, that I wasn't expecting, and definitely not the reason that I wrote the book. But to know that like the words that I used for myself have now sort of found their way to other people dealing with, hopefully non-supernatural deaths uh, is a weird, unexpected gift of writing that book.
It's always good when your work can impact someone in a very positive way.
Yeah.
Do you
hmm
have any? I know you kind of said on a blanket statement, you've had people reach out to you and tell you that, oh, th this helped me get through this. Is there like one experience maybe that stands out above the others to you of someone coming to, maybe not about this work particularly, but somebody else or another work potentially, someone coming up to you and asking and telling you like, this got me through a rough time.
I just last week I was doing a signing, and someone came up to me and said that the reason they sort of were able to come to terms with their own gender fluidity was because they were reading about Mars in the Honeys, the main character of the Honeys, and which was great because I sat down and I made sure that there was space in the narrative where Mars got to say in their own words what their experience was like, and also state that it's kind of different for a lot of different people. And this person at the signing was like, yeah, that like one like that kind of unlocked a few things for me, and I feel, like such a better person now that I kind of have access to my true self. And that was like, oh my God, I like have chills thinking about it. And I, in the moment, you always want to play it cool and be like, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. But like, I cried about it later. I was like, that's really beautiful. And not something that I feel entitled to even knowing, but thank you for telling me.
What are your thoughts now on the Honeys now, or it's becoming a motion picture? Like, what was that whole conversation
Oh, I have
like?
so many thoughts on it. It's going well. I'll tell for anyone listening, just for updates there. It's going really well so far. It's a slow process, so it does test your patience. But I'm kind of in the unique position of being both the author of the book and an executive producer on the film side. So I'm being consulted in a way that feels really meaningful. Interestingly enough, one of the first sort of passes at like putting together a script for it didn't have this one particular moment that I was just referencing in an earlier question about Mars's gender fluidity. And being the author of this book and getting responses from readers has kind of informed me as to what's really stayed with people. And so now I feel like I have this kind of crowdsourced idea of the value of the work, and I've been able to kind of guide the movie as a result and say like, okay, I think I think we definitely have to include this scene, and it's got to be this character, and yada yada yada. And so I've had some good experiences so far, and I feel very listened to, which is not what you expect when you see the depictions of adaptations, in media in general. You kind of expect to be sidelined completely, but turns out like I'm pretty meaningful when it comes to this particular process, which I feel very lucky about.
So the Honeys comes out, and it's a
hmm
success. People love it, and you're off to the next book. In Beholder, there's a narrative device where you're switching between the first and second person throughout the book. Was
hmm
this a difficult balance for you to find when you were writing it?
You know, originally that whole book was going to be written in second person,
Mhm.
but my group chat of writers very astutely said, this is going to be like, that's going to be terrible. Please don't do that to yourself, and don't do it to the reader either. And writing in second person, it's a bit of a gimmick, right? Like it's fun, it's interesting, but I think a whole narrative would have been a little crazy. And ultimately, I'm very glad with what I ended up with, which is a narrative that toggles between Ethan, the main character, and then this entity that's watching him and talking directly to him. Because that book is ultimately like, the symbolism behind a lot of this is OCD and intrusive thoughts, and sort of the voice in the back of our head that is telling us to do something against our own will or against our own better judgment or our own welfare. And so it seemed to make sense to give that entity, that malevolent force, a voice that is directed at you, is telling you to do this, is talking to you about who you are. And also, as a writer, it kind of allows you to deploy information about a character that they might not be eager to kind of give away in their first person narrative. And so you kind of learn about Ethan as he is seen by other people, which, is a little bit in his blind spot. But that's kind of where this creature lives.
Were you nervous about making not making the jump, but transitioning to your next project after the Honeys was so successful? Was there a part of you that was a little nervous about what came next after that?
Yeah, I couldn't have anticipated that the Honeys was going to be as successful as it was, but I was excited to kind of show people that I could do more. And they're such different books. Like The Honeys takes place in this bucolic, gorgeous summer camp in the Catskills, whereas Beholder takes place in sort of the grimy undercity that's like beneath New York City. And they have a lot in common in terms of their discussions of grief and unreliable narrators and things like that. But I wanted to show range early on, especially being sort of a new horror writer, and I wanted to show two vastly different types of monsters between the girls from the Honeys and then this entity from Beholder. So I'm glad that I did those two separately. Um, but I might find my way back to the Honeys. I get a lot of questions about sequels for that book, and recently I've been kind of feeling a pull back towards that world. So yeah, maybe we'll see.
That's one thing I did that we noticed in our thumbing through the books was your endings are a little ambiguous sometimes.
Mhm.
I was curious if that was future proofing potential sequels or it was leaving it to the reader's imaginations or maybe a touch of both.
The ending of the Honeys does really ask you to sit in Mars's soul and determine whether or not it's a good or bad thing that's happened to them. And I stay away from sort of giving clues about this because I kind of know what I think, but I've written it purposely so that you kind of have to ask yourself that question. Beholder's ending is extremely tragic. But there's a beauty to it and sort of a peace to it that is ultimately, I think, what resonates with people. Um, and I like the kind of open-ended question because I think oftentimes horror comes down to not really having a clean resolve to something. You know, does it live on? Does the cycle of trauma
Yeah.
continue or does it end? And that kind of depends on your imagination as a reader and your ability to kind of imagine through an ending that I have sort of stepped aside from.
What are some of your horror inspirations? I'm just a little curious now that you mentioned the
Sure.
ambiguity.
I for like if people love the Honeys, a lot of that came from my favorite film, Suspiria. And there's like a remake of Suspiria that was in like the last couple of years, and I like both of them. But like Midsommar is also another great film that I feel like that's actually a great point. That ending is very ambiguous, right? Like something like it's pretty determined for a few of the characters that perish, but for Danny, for the main character, it's hard to kind of know if it's good or bad what's happened to her or how she feels about it. And I think that's kind of what was in my mind when I was approaching my own version of it. The irony is that like I absorb a lot of horror. I love the sort of like schlocky, cheesy horror from like the 90s and like the weird creature features and stuff like that too. Recently, though, I've been doing a lot of like underwater horror and looking at like sea creatures for obvious reasons with the book that I'm currently promoting. And I don't know that it's inspiring, but it has been kind of fun to delve into the very robust catalog of humanity's fears about sea monsters.
On that note, I guess Dead of Summer. That's your latest and greatest work. It's
Yeah.
a very I was gonna say fun. Fun not be, might not be the right word. It's a very engaging, kind of apocalyptic story, and you do feature a lot of the marine biology stuff. When writing this story, writing a new story in general, a lot of time and research goes into getting details right. When researching, do you find yourself kind of longing to keep learning about topics like music or marine biology, even when you're compelled, or even you've completed your own goal?
There is such a wealth of really interesting science to be delved into when it comes to the deep, right? Not just the ecology of it, but also how we access it, like the technology. I went on a whole tangent recently looking at the history of the diving bell and all of the many horrific accidents that have occurred to humans for whatever reason trying to get to the bottom of the ocean. A terrible idea, but a profitable one that has yielded some real life horrors that I've started to pull from for the sequel to The Dead of Summer. And so yeah, I can waste a whole day just looking at like, the chemical composition of gas needed in a tank that a deep sea diver might use in order for them to not die from the bends, right? Like, and eventually you do kind of have to sit back and say like, okay, what's going to be productive? What am I actually going to need for the story? But sometimes you just don't know, and you've got to take the time to be a student, midway through a draft. And sometimes it's worth it and you get a lot of fun facts for your book. And sometimes you just get a lot of fun facts that you're going to, trot out during an interview or at dinner or something like that.
Yeah.
So I now know a lot about absolutely nothing.
Everyone loves a good fun fact.
Yeah, I mean I'm full of it. I'm like a walking, talking like PhD on like marine accidents currently.
The drag community and the queer community both play very big roles in Dead of Summer.
Mhm.
Historically, those two groups have come together in powerful ways during time of crisis. How did you draw on that spirit of solidarity when shaping the world and the characters of this book?
Right. So in the dead of summer, the island that the whole book takes place upon is called Anchor's Mercy, and it's kind of modeled after Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is this, very historied haven for artists and queer people. And you go there and it sort of feels like a bit of fiction has come to life around you because it's like there's like drag queens everywhere. They're your bank tellers, they're the cops, right? Like they're the people that are running like the bed and breakfasts. And I love that because drag performers have been pretty integral to they've been a great focal point for our community, both like the joy of it, but also the persecution of it for a really long time. And so it felt very natural that in writing a book about a disaster that occurs on an island full of queer people, they would look to their queens, they would look to their drag queens as the points of authority. Um, in this book, for instance, the main character Ollie, he starts to figure out that something bad is sort of coming in town. Something's spreading around the community, and he tells one of his guardians, who's a drag queen, that his old piano teacher, who's now a drag queen, and they they do their best to shut things down because they know that in a time when something is spreading, the best thing you can do is sort of keep people home. And we have seen time and time again queer communities, they never really get the credit until it's too late. But there's a lot of health-seeking behaviors that have been exhibited largely in part of our experience with like the AIDS crisis, right? Back in the 80s. And so in this version of it, they do their best to kind of stop the spread of something sort of supernatural, this parasite. And they're successful. They do get people to stay home, but it's the bachelorette parties that are in town that are determined to have their girls' night out, their karaoke that kind of spoil it for everybody. And that's why, like, this book about sort of these like marine revenant creatures, the first wave of them are all girls with tiaras and their little wobbly heels and their sashes that say bride or die. Because I wanted to write about not just some invasion from the ocean, but kind of a real life invasive force that you really can't help but find in places like this. Wait, by the way, I love a bachelorette party. I'm not knocking them, but uh, if there is a supernatural plague at your doorstep, maybe do do the karaoke in your own home.
You can make Jello shots at home. It's fine. It's good. It's all cool.
Yeah, yeah. Look at the recipe. Ina Garten has some great cocktails, girls. Just sit tight.
Ryan, I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to ask one more kind of bigger question about this. Then I have a few just quick little small guys we'll get through, and then I'll let you go. I've heard you kind of in interviews previously mention how COVID inspired a lot of, like, it didn't inspire the Honeys, but it gave you the kind of the time to write it and it gave you an escape from it.
Mhm.
With The Dead of Summer, was there any inspiration from, I guess, from watching things play out in that time that kind of carried over maybe into writing the early stages of this book when the outbreak is spreading?
Yeah, I wanted to write a book about an outbreak, but in our own experience, right? Like we've all kind of had this mass trauma of looking at how something like this gets out of control so fast through, really delayed decisions to protect people. And so I wanted to write a book that followed Ollie, the main character, through this sort of catastrophic contagion. But yeah, I wanted to write about a catastrophe sort of viewed from all sides because I feel like that's kind of the experience that we had as people going through this.
Okay. Do you think you'll stay with young adult forever, or do you want to maybe venture out into a kind of more grown-up territory one day, or maybe even like write for a younger audience, even than younger than that?
I love writing young adult novels, and I've got a few more horrors in my head that I think would be specifically good for teenage characters, which I think is sort of the demarcation for me for YA. But I definitely have some more adult leaning ideas in me that I hope I have time for. I honestly, I'm someone who has a lot of book ideas, and so it's just about finding the right time to kind of get it all down.
And then I guess last question. a complete hypothetical question,
Sure.
complete hypothetical. In your research for Beholder, hypothetically speaking, how many places did you research while sneaking around town to get into places shouldn't have been, maybe, and hypothetically bending the rules a little bit, possibly?
Yeah, you're asking me how many places did I trespass just to see how deep I could get into the elite society of New York? Yeah, is that what you're asking?
Allegedly,
Allegedly.
allegedly.
Yeah, and the answer is no one will ever know if I'm lucky. Where I've been, what I was doing there, how I got in. Those are secrets that I hope that I get to die with.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair enough. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Where can people go to keep up with you, and where can they go to find your latest and greatest works?
I would love if people would come and find me on the internet. I post a lot about not just my own like work, but my life and my cat. So if you want to find me online, most of my usernames are the Ryan La Sala. But you also can just head to my website, ryanlasala.com.
All right, sounds great. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us for a little bit. It's been a real treat. And
Yeah.
just good luck with the rest of your press tour and your just everything you've got going on. You have your hands in a lot of pots right now.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an absolute joy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us this week on the Writer's Black podcast. You were an absolute treat to get to talk to. He's a really unique voice in the young adult space, I think. I think it strikes a really good balance between horror that a young audience can digest and an older audience can appreciate a little bit more. So I think that he's a truly unique voice. You guys should absolutely keep up with Ryan and all the things he is doing over on his website, ryanlasala.com. Connect with him on social media. He's out there. He's doing all the things. And of course, go to your local bookshop or ebook dealer and pick up Dead of Summer, his latest release, available right now. Really good book, guys, if you are looking for something to get in that spookier season spirit. It's a really good one. Also, The Honeys and Beholder, go check those out too. They exist. They're good. Please read them. Next week on the podcast, we're having another young adult author. Not necessarily young adult horror, but young adult spooky. Some young adult spooky. Clarabelle Ortega will be joining us next week on the podcast, talking about the Witchlings series, as well as talking about her earlier works, the difference between writing young adult horror and something a little more young adult lighthearted, her routine for taking care of her mental health to prevent burnout on her very busy schedule, and I'll ask her the most important question of all: which Sims game is the best?
I think in the very beginning of my career, there was a lot of sort of like pushing off things that were, self-care or even taking care of yourself just in normal everyday life things for writing and like overworking myself. And it was always sort of like a moving goalpost. And then I realized I'm pushing so many things aside, so many moments with my family and friends, so much of the things that I should be doing for myself and taking care of myself and my life in service of these books, when in reality, what I'm doing is I'm creating a really unhealthy work-life balance.
If you're enjoying the Writer's Block podcast, please, on Apple Podcast and Spotify, leave us a review, give us some stars, give us some questions, comments, and concerns. Let us know what we can improve on, what we're doing well, even guests that you want to see. I'm sure if I pay off the right wizard, I can get some stuff going. So please, by all means, just let us know anything in the comments. You can also keep up with us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Writers Block Pod. And if you want to go that extra mile, you can support us by going over to patreon.com/writersblockpod and subscribing for absolutely free. You'll get the podcast 1 day early, as well as get access to some bonus content perks, and who knows, maybe even some merch down the line. Where guys, I really want a coffee mug. I really want a Writers Block coffee mug. I just need it in my life, and your support over on Patreon will make that happen. So please, for the coffee mug, for all of us, head over to patreon.com/writersblockpod, and we'll figure it all out. We'll get a coffee mug going. It'll be great. I want to thank you guys once again so much for listening to this week's episode. Until next time, I've been Lego My Grego. You've been awesome, and keep writing. Did I just do my Lego My Grego outro? I did. I think I'll keep it.